Well, hi there. Welcome to Handmade House TV. And on this week's episode, we're going to talk about chink gaps, the space between the courses of logs when we're building a log cabin. What is the ideal distance to put our logs apart from each other when we're building them? And why should we put them apart at all? Why shouldn't we just cram them together? So stay tuned. Well, all right, once again, thank you for tuning in here to Handmade House TV, and thank you for subscribing to this channel and for your kind comments that you leave below. They're deeply appreciated. Today we're going to talk about log cabins and the chink gap between the logs. What's the ideal distance to keep between them, and why do we have them anyway? And why we have them, I think we've covered plenty here on Handmade House TV, and that is that the best, if you want to build a log cabin, the best way to do it is not the way that I invented or the modern way of doing it or the patented way of doing it. It's the way that it was done for hundreds of years, that is proven to last for centuries, that everybody and his brother did it, that was the result of many cultures coming together, of fine craftsmen and of boundless materials in order to build a log cabin that was maintenance free, that housed people in comfort and safety for centuries. It was the most dominant form of construction here in America for 150 to 200 years, and everyone was doing it. Farmer John was doing it, as well as the fine teams of German craftsmen that were building homes at the time. And they would build it in the traditional style, whereas they would hew the inside and outside faces of the logs. They would do nice joinery in the corners, particularly half dovetail and V-notch logs. And they would always, well, 99.9% of the time, leave a chink gap between them. And I have yet to find a book written by the guys back then of why they left a chink gap between it. But there's a variety of reasonable thoughts behind it. For one thing, it's easier to do. For another thing, as you're building, you're tending to rise quicker with a space in between the logs going up. But I think that the primary reason for doing it was that you had to put something between where the logs anyway, and you had to do chinking in there in between the two. And what was the distance, what was the thickness of chinking that was easiest to apply and made the most amount of sense? And that works out to about a 4-inch gap between each course of the log. It can be a little bit closer and a little bit wider than that, but I think that was the primary purpose. You need to put something between the logs, and that worked out to be the best as far as putting rocks or chips of wood in there, and for applying a mud there that would be thick enough in order that it wouldn't immediately crack and fall off. And and as a side thing, when it was done this way, there was a lot of side benefits to it. For one thing, it worked. It proved itself that these individuals would build their houses, and here it's a couple centuries later, there's not been a single coat of sealer put to them. And a lot of times I will encounter these historic log cabins where almost no maintenance has been done to them whatsoever, and they're still perfect. They're in great shape after all this time. So clearly it works, whereas the modern method of putting one log on top of the other, such as in the button pass method or the cheaper versions of log cabin kits, you have to slather on an expensive and toxic wood sealer on it every year or every couple of years in order to keep them from rotting, because anytime you have two layers of wood that are touching each other, water tends to be drawn in between that. The water stays there and it will rot out the log. So why is it, first of all, we're a little bit offended at seeing chinking in there, and that is because the chances are the first and only cabins that you're exposed to are these ones that are presented at log cabin shows, or movies on a Hallmark channel where they're staying in a log cabin. And so we're seeing these basically telephone poles where all the logs are stacked, touching each other. So we're conditioned to not seeing chink gaps there. And so this is what we're looking at. So we're used to seeing we want to see solid logs. We don't really want to see this stuff in between the logs. But once you start to establish an appreciation for the chinking, a reason behind that, suddenly you start to find the chinking as being something that's appealing to you, that actually contributes to it. It's sort of like a picture frame is to a painting. That is that the chinking actually makes the logs more beautiful because it accentuates them. Log cabins with chinking tend to be brighter inside because of this whiter surface. Coming back to you, this chinking area gives us a great place to install insulation. It's a great place to run all of our electrical wiring in there. And that's one of the reasons why I think that you should maintain the 4-inch distance. That's an ideal number. It can go down to an inch. It can go up to 8 inches. That's kind of extreme, but I've seen it done before. But anyway, in this chinking is where you can put your electrical outlets. So if you're leaving a chinking gap that's wider than an electrical outlet, then you have room to put the chinking outlet in there. Whereas if you try to shrink it down to 2 inches, you're not going to have it, and you end up doing chiseling, and it makes for a much uglier log cabin, and it's more labor intensive to put together as well. Also, in the process of constructing the cabin, by having 4 inches gaps, you can climb that log cabin. It's almost like a ladder as you're building it, and you do a lot of up and down in the process of building a log cabin. And it's fun, and it makes sense. Rather than grabbing a ladder all the time, you can actually run up and down a log cabin by climbing them. And a lot of times when I'm doing the notches in the corners, I just take a 2x4 and push into the notches between the spacing between the logs in the corners, and I'll create myself a little mini scaffolding there that I can work off of as I work on the notch. So there's a lot of hidden little features there. So I've seen some tremendous workmanship in folks today who are faithfully trying to replicate the traditional method of log cabin construction. And they will do excellent notches. They'll get really nice logs, and they'll go to the trouble of putting together a really nice log cabin, but they're still dealing with this wanting to get as much log as possible and reducing this chink gap as narrow as it is, and they're putting out a whole lot more effort, and they're ending up with, in the end, they realize that the chink gaps made a whole lot more sense at 4 inches than it did at 2, and that you might think that you want them closer together when you're building it, but in the end, once you get done with it, you realize that a little bit further apart would have made more sense. It would have worked better. So my whole goal here in Handmade House TV and in all the Academy courses I create over at Handmade Houses is that I had the privilege of building many homes, and I've learned from the process. I've had the privilege of working along with some of the finest craftsmen the world's ever had, and I've had the privilege of exploring literally thousands of historic homes, and I've learned from them through the process of decades. And I realize that most of you guys that I'm speaking to, I am speaking to some real builders there that are trying to up their game, that are trying to get a better home. And I appreciate every one of you, and I'm glad I can help you out. But I realize also that a lot of you guys, you got one shot at this. You are blessed in order to be able to actually have you put out the effort in order to buy that piece of land, in order to build that dream home, and you want it as good as you possibly can. You want to bring it to the next level, and you don't want to build a house and then when you're finished and you're thinking back and you see the results of your work, and I wish I had done this different, wish I had done this differently. Well, maybe the next one, but likely you got one shot at this. And so, and me sharing this stuff, I'm never trying to say, oh, look how much I know. I mean, I'm really a brilliant guy. I learned so many of life's lessons the hard way, and I'm trying my best to ensure that you don't have to do this. And when it comes to building your log cabin, you cannot beat the traditional time-proven method of building a log cabin. And when it comes time to do that chink gap, make sure that it's wide enough that you can stick your hand in between the logs, that you can stick your toe in between the logs so you can climb it, so that you can put an electrical box in there without having to chisel out everything, so that there's enough airspace, enough of a gap in between that the chinking won't crack when it's forced to be too small, so that it looks historic. It looks like it was built by someone that knew what they were doing, something that would last for centuries to come. That's what you want. That's what you want. That's what I want you to have. So thank you so much for signing in here today. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Thank you for the positive likes and comments. And you guys take care. We'll talk to you here next week on Handmade House TV. Bye now. Hi there, I'm Noah Bradley with HandmadeHouses.com, and I'd like to welcome you to this page that will tell you details with regard to the Chinking Academy. Perhaps you know that I'm considered to be an expert on log cabins. I put together the Log Cabin Academy, and I've been building and restoring log cabins for nearly 4 decades. And by now I know what I'm doing. And I offer the Log Cabin Academy for those individuals that want to build a log cabin from scratch, as far as designing it all the way through the last details, that in order to properly build one. But I hear from a lot of people that already own a log cabin, and they would like to know how to properly chink it, and they just want that particular segment of the entire course. Chinking takes up 2 hours of the over 8-hour length of the Log Cabin Academy. And so what I have done is that I have extracted those 2 hours from the Log Cabin Academy, and then I added a prequel video to it to introduce you to chinking, and then a follow-up video. So there's 4 videos altogether within the Chinking Academy, and the 4th one is anything that I might have missed with regard to those 2 hours of original filming, and answer any questions that have popped up in the couple of years it's been since I initially created that, in order to give a complete, comprehensive chinking course. Now, again, I say that chinking is one of the most critical aspects in the construction of a log cabin. Throughout my career, it has been the one subject that most of the people who have contacted me in need of my services have wanted. Chinking is extremely rarely done correctly by other individuals, and when it is done incorrectly, the damage that results on one's log home can be immense, to the point where if it goes long enough, you can actually lose a log cabin. And I have seen this happen. Frequently, if someone pays to install chinking done incorrectly, they have to pay for it one time, and then if the chinking is installed incorrectly and that causes log rot, then they have to pay me to come in to remove the chinking first of all, then repair the logs, then apply the chinking correctly. Meaning that the cost of the expense of building, of properly chinking a log cabin is now 4 times what if you had done it correctly the first time. Chinking done correctly should last your lifetime. Chinking that I have done is now 30 to 40 years old. Some of the earliest chinking that I did, it's still in perfect condition, still holding up well, and still extremely attractive. Now, if you've been following along, you know that I like to chink using a cement product, which is extremely durable, long-lasting, somewhat historically accurate, does not damage the logs in any way, is earth-friendly, and extremely durable. So I hope that if you have a log cabin built in the traditional manner with chink joints that are 1 inch or up to a foot in width that you will consider signing up with the Chinking Academy. I'm going to share within it exactly step by step all of the considerations associated with chinking a home properly, and I hope that you stick with it. I hope you follow along exactly and you take my recommendations, and if you do, I guarantee you that you'll be thoroughly pleased with the entire process. So I look forward to seeing you within the Chinking Academy. Take care.